This is the brand new Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and this is the Vivo X200 Pro. In this video, we will compare the photo and video capabilities of these two top flagship models on the market.
Hey friends, this video was translated using a neural network, so the sound quality isn't the best. If you want to listen to the original sound from a smartphone and hear the audio recording test, just follow the link in the description to our original video.
We are starting the filming day and we have 100% charge on both smartphones.
Friends, in the first test, as usual, is the front camera in 4K, 60 frames per second on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, 4K 60 frames per second on the Vivo X200 Pro. Right now, we have challenging conditions. Here, the sun is lighting me well. This is how smartphones work when filming with the sun directly strong. It's lighting from behind. So, this is how the face looks overall.
When shooting in bright light, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra performs better. The face remains well lit, but not overexposed, preserving more details. Vivo X200 Pro has a brighter picture and more detailed video, noticeably lower. The skin tone and overall color reproduction turned out differently. Xiaomi creates a warm, yellowish image with a similarly yellowish skin tone. The Vivo video is cooler with a pinkish skin tone. Both smartphones handle backlighting differently. Xiaomi produces a yellow-pink image, noticeably altering the background and oversaturating the face. Vivo's video comes out cool, with noticeable signature turquoise shades. At the same time, the image looks more natural with a normal grass color and a more natural skin tone. In terms of stabilization, there's an obvious advantage. Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the image is smooth with no jitters. On the Vivo, there's noticeable shaking and the image becomes even more blurry when running.
Both smartphones can capture images with a background blur effect.
Only Full HD 30 frames per second on the front camera.
Both smartphones handle the background blur effect not perfectly, but quite well. However, the 15 Ultra again produces more detailed images. Looking at the skin, hair, and clothing texture. However, I don't like the skin tone on the Xiaomi. It's dark, especially when shooting against the light, and too saturated. In this regard, Vivo, in my opinion, provides a more pleasant result. But the stabilization is held a bit more confidently by the 15 Ultra. As for the specifications, both smartphones have a 32 megapixel sensor with an f2.0 aperture. However, Xiaomi has a slightly larger sensor size and pixel size. These smartphones do not have autofocus on the front cameras.
And this is what our filming looks like if you shoot with an ultra-wide-angle lens.
4K 60 frames per second on both smartphones. We have such a beautiful line.
The image from the ultra-wide-angle lens is better and more detailed with Xiaomi. This is noticeable if we look, for example, at the path or the greenery. Here we can clearly see the difference in the coverage of the ultra-wides. The 15 Ultra clearly has a wider field of view. During active movement, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra handles stabilization better, although there are noticeable slight jitters. But with the Vivo X200 Pro, the shaking is still stronger. We check how the cameras handle high contrast scenes when the foreground is pulled. Both smartphones show similar results. The face is somewhat dark, and almost all of the sky in the background is blown out, but Xiaomi wins in terms of detail. This is evident in the clothing, face, and hair. When shooting against the light, you can notice that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra again has better detail, whereas the Vivo blurs everything again. As for skin color, Xiaomi makes the face look yellowish, while its competitor delivers a more natural skin tone. In my opinion, stabilization worked better on the Vivo. With Xiaomi, the background shakes quite a bit and gets blurred.
And this is what the footage looks like if you shoot with the main lens at 1x 4K 60 frames per second.
When shooting at 1x, the colors on smartphones are quite similar, but Xiaomi slightly more saturates the foreground. The video quality is also more or less the same, but we will evaluate it further in the zoom test. As for stabilization, the 15 Ultra leads again, although jitters are noticeable on both smartphones. On the Vivo, they are significantly stronger.
How does color correction work on smartphones if you're shooting?
When the sun shines strongly on the main camera block.
When filming yourself, both smartphones produce a good picture. The color reproduction is similar, and the skin tone changes depending on the lighting. Sometimes it's yellowish on the Xiaomi, sometimes on the Vivo. Facial details, clothing, hair, everything looks great on both smartphones. The stabilization worked about the same on both. When shooting with a 2x zoom, Vivo retains much more detail than the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Pay attention to the path or the bushes. The stabilization on the Xiaomi works a bit more confidently, although there are slight shakes visible. And blurring. On the Vivo, the frame wobbles from side to side. Now we're shooting video in portrait mode. On the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the film is recorded in full HD at 24 frames per second, while on the Vivo, in video portrait mode, we can shoot in 4K at 30 frames per second, which is, of course, much better. Both gadgets handle background blurring quite well. Overall, the images are quite similar, but Vivo handles light correction better. Smartphones sometimes make mistakes with boundaries. This is noticeable if we look, for example, at the hair. I also note that in motion, Xiaomi better maintains focus on the face. As for image quality, the 15 Ultra retains more details than Vivo. This is especially noticeable on the face and hair. What about skin tone? Xiaomi sometimes makes the face look yellowish, especially in bright lighting. The Vivo X200 Pro, on the other hand, provides a more saturated result. The skin looks pinkish, but more pleasant than on the 15 Ultra. Both smartphones maintain stabilization quite well in this mode. And how do the smartphones perform when filming someone else in motion? My daughter Mia kindly agreed to help me with this test, and overall, the smartphone delivers a very similar result. The focus is maintained, and the blur boundary, even around the hair, looks good. The main difference is only in exposure and color reproduction. Xiaomi makes the image very yellow, giving an unpleasant skin tone. I can say that it also inaccurately reproduced the color of the jack. I prefer the color reproduction of Vivo. It maintains more natural colors and provides more accurate color reproduction. Let's move on to the enhanced stabilization test.
It's important to say that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can perform enhanced stabilization, the so-called steady shot, only in 2.8K, 30 frames per second, whereas the Vivo X200 Pro does this in 2.8K, 60 frames per second.
Enabled enhanced stabilization, and let's see how our smartphone performs when super enhanced stabilization is activated.
What does the picture look like? Will our smartphones be able to handle it in such a complex shoot?
When shooting with enhanced stabilization, both smartphones deliver roughly similar results. Both the Xiaomi 15 Ultra and the Vivo X200 Pro didn't perform very confidently. However, the Vivo did exhibit more noticeable shaking in some areas.
The Xiaomi 15 Ultra can shoot 8K video at 30 frames per second with the ultra-wide lens. Meanwhile, the Vivo X200 Pro only records in 4K on the main camera.
I should note right away that on the ultra-wide-angle lens in 8K, the stabilization on the 15 Ultra is very weak. Vivo delivers a much more stable image, and as it seems to me, more detailed, even though it only shoots in 4K on the ultra-wide. And with running, of course, the X200 Pro performs much more confidently.
This is what the picture looks like if you film yourself in 8K with an ultra-wide lens on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. 4K at 30 frames per second on the ultra-wide of the Vivo X200 Pro.
When filming yourself, the detail is slightly better with Xiaomi. For example, if we pay attention to the lawn, but in the foreground, there's no noticeable difference. Regarding stabilization, it's the same story. With Xiaomi, we see shaking, while Vivo holds steady.
And now we're shooting 8K on both smartphones. Main lens 1x, 30 frames per second. How interestingly our smartphones will perform.
When shooting at 1x, Vivo also enables 8K. The X200 Pro again provides us with a clearer result, with higher sharpness, and the stabilization on the X200 Pro once again works noticeably better.
And now shooting in 8K at 30 frames per second on both smartphones, with a 1x lens. Again, very challenging conditions. The sun is shining very brightly on me. Well, it's the golden hour, so we decided to go out and take some photos. Is it possible to capture a quality image with these smartphones?
When filming yourself, the image clarity is higher. With Xiaomi, Vivo gives us higher sharpness, but it retains fewer details on the face. When shooting with the light, the 15 Ultra provides a warm and very bright image with a rich yellowish skin tone. At the same time, on Vivo, the colors look much more natural. When shooting against the light, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra also saturates the face and gives us a warmer result. We also see that the grass has become quite unnatural yellow, and the sky is more blown out than on Vivo. On the X200 Pro, at the same time, we observe a darker face, but the skin tone looks more natural than on Xiaomi. The greenery and sky also look more pleasant. In terms of stabilization, the new model loses to Vivo again.
By the way, both of our smartphones can also record in 8K 2x. So, we're shooting in 8K 2x. But the coolest thing is that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can even shoot 8K 4.3, meaning even on the telephoto lens.
When shooting in 2x, the situation repeats. Vivo once again significantly enhances the sharpness of the image, but the video quality is quite comparable to Xiaomi's results. At the same time, the new model again falls short of the competitor in terms of stabilization. Overall, I would say that 8K on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra while moving is not a viable mode. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra is equipped with an ultra-wide-angle module of 50MP, a main lens of 50MP, as well as two telephoto lenses, a floating 50MP and a second ultra telephoto lens of 200MP. The Vivo X200 Pro has a main lens of 50MP, an ultra-wide angle of 50MP, and a telephoto camera of 200MP. The lens on the telephoto lenses of the Vivo is also floating. We are testing the long-range capability of the video zoom. On the ultra-wide angle lens, the image on the Xiaomi looks more detailed. This is noticeable if we zoom in, for example, on this inscription, switching to the main lens. Here, the result is very similar, but the Vivo performs slightly better. better. The text turned out to be more readable. At 2x zoom, there is no noticeable difference between the smartphones, but Xiaomi shows some color distortion here, turning on the telephoto lenses. 3x on Xiaomi and 3.7x on Vivo. And here, the X200 Pro performs noticeably better due to a more advanced telephoto lens. At 4.3x, Xiaomi also activates the 200-megapixel telephoto lens. And here, both images are very similar. Similarly, at 5x, the difference is practically non-existent. Next, we have a 10x zoom. Here, the detail is better on the Vivo. The text on the sign is more clearly visible. At 20x, the Vivo X200 Pro also delivers better detail. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra can shoot with a 30x video zoom, but there's not much point in it. Remember, Xiaomi has 8K on the ultra-wide. We compare it with 4K. On the X200 Pro, I can say that the 15 Ultra indeed has a noticeable advantage in detail and clarity. On the main lens, 8K is also available on the Vivo, but here there's no difference in detail between the videos. I can say the same about the 2x zoom. It's great that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra can shoot in 8K on all lenses. Not every flagship can do that, but does this resolution have an advantage? Or is it better to shoot in 4K on the Xiaomi? On the ultra-wide in 8K, the detail is higher, the text appears neater, without the pixelated outline like in 4K. The image looks sharper, but at the same time darker, and there is more noise in the shadows. On the main lens at 1x, 8K also provides a quality advantage. The text is easier to read, but the color distortions are still present. At 2x, there's again an increase in detail, the letters become sharper and easier to read. However, the color distortions are still present here as well. On the 3x telephoto lens, 8K also has advantages. Details are sharper and the text is slightly more visible. On the second telephoto lens with a focal length of 4.3x, 8K again provides a higher quality image. There are more details, less noise, and fewer distortions. So yes, for static shooting, 8K on Xiaomi is quite a good option, shooting for higher detail. With Vivo, the differences between 4K and 8K are practically not noticeable. Now I suggest taking a look at how smartphones shoot HDR and LOD video. It's impressive that both smartphones allow shooting in a logarithmic profile at almost all focal lengths. But overall, there's not much difference between the phones in this test. Shooting with a logarithmic profile looks decent on both the Xiaomi 15 Ultra and the Vivo X200 Pro. I should note that we use official LUTs provided on the manufacturer's websites for coloring the raw videos. These LUTs give us only a base for further work with the image, and then you can manually try and refine the color correction to your liking. We can also shoot in Dolby Vision at all focal lengths on both smartphones. And, in my opinion, the image turns out pleasant. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra has a mode, dual recording. Here we can simultaneously film ourselves and everything around us. Implementation at 4K, 30 frames per second is top-notch. Excellent detail and pleasant color reproduction. Let's see how smoothly smartphones switch between lenses. On the Xiaomi, the first transition between the ultra-wide and the main lens looks bad. We see a sharp change in scale and perspective, as well as a different white balance. The transition from the main lens to the first 3x telephoto lens also shows a harsh switch, just like when switching from this telephoto lens to the next 4.3x. On the Vivo, the switch from the ultra-wide to 1x is done more carefully and smoothly, although it's still not perfect. However, the transition at the junction of the main lens and the telephoto lens is not as smooth. Additionally, there is a noticeable strong change in the white balance. Now we are testing macro video shooting. The Vivo X200 Pro is a top smartphone in terms of macro shooting. It delivers more details because it shoots macro with a telephoto lens. Meanwhile, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra uses a floating telephoto lens for macro shooting and an ultra-wide lens for super macro. And overall, it also shows quite a decent result. Let's check how the smartphone handles slow motion. The Vivo X200 Pro supports slow motion recording in 4K at 120 frames per second, which the Xiaomi 15 Ultra cannot offer. It only has full HD available. For a 2025 flagship, this is a strange omission. And in terms of detail, of course, Vivo definitely wins here. But here I will make a reservation. On the Xiaomi, in regular 4K shooting mode, we can set it to 120 frames per second and then slow down the video during editing. But why 4K isn't available with slow motion is unclear. 240 frames per second. Xiaomi has significant focus issues, whereas Vivo handles it without complaints. And in terms of stabilization, Vivo takes the lead again. Of course, its stabilization isn't perfect either, and you can see some shaking and a jelly effect. But the situation with Xiaomi is even more disappointing. Xiaomi also offers a unique slow-mo recording mode at 1920 frames per second in full HD, which is rare for smartphones. The result is very interesting. We can track the trajectory of a shuttlecock in extreme slow motion. It looks impressive, I must admit. However, shooting such videos is quite challenging. You need to press the shutter button at the right moment to capture a great shot. Let's move on to one of my favorite modes, shooting to time-lapse. In this mode, the smartphone takes shots at long intervals and then stitches them into one video. And we get such beauty. Xiaomi, I can commend it for dimming the screen during time-lapse shooting to save battery. And it informs us that recording is in progress. However, as I tested in practice, this doesn't help at all. When shooting long time-lapse, during the recording of one of them, the Xiaomi just completely drained. Meanwhile, Vivo shot 8 hours of time-lapse and still had 53% 3% battery left. Vivo also delights with a huge set of presets for shooting time-lapse. In my opinion, it offers the most convenient shooting experience for this video mode. Everything is done clearly and simply. At the same time, the quality of time-lapse on the Vivo X200 Pro also pleases me a lot. Although the Xiaomi 15 Ultra also did well with time-lapse recording. From day to night, it's quite good. Both smartphones handle night time-lapse excellently. With Xiaomi, the image turns out slightly brighter than with the X200 Pro. And now we're testing how smartphones handle regular selfies. The first photo. In terms of skin quality, the result. But the skin tones are very different. With Xiaomi, the skin appears intensely red, while with Vivo it turns very yellow. Taking a second selfie with my daughter. Now Xiaomi shifts the face color to orange, while Vivo's skin tone looks more natural. In the third photo, the difference in skin color is small, but still noticeable. And here it's clear that Xiaomi has a wider front camera angle. This is definitely a plus if we want to capture several people at once. Taking a photo with a lit background and a dark foreground. With Xiaomi, the skin is again rich and slightly orange, while Vivo's skin tone is more pleasant, and the face is better lit. Another plus for Vivo, it's the makeup effect on the front camera. You can finally adjust skin smoothing if you need it. Let's move on to portrait selfies. In the first shot, there's an interesting picture. With Xiaomi, the face is rich and somewhat dark, while the sky is pale. With Vivo, it's the opposite. As for the blur, both smartphones handled it quite neatly. In the second photo, the makeup effect is activated on Vivo. The skin is heavily smoothed, and the skin tone is yellow. With Xiaomi, the skin color turned out nicer. Unfortunately, both smartphones didn't handle my wife's hair well. With Xiaomi, it's completely erased. And with Vivo, it's partially there, over the statue in the background. It looks strange. And one more nuance. With Xiaomi, the gap between the faces is blurred incorrectly. The third photo already has 3 people. Here, Vivo has more minor issues along the border of the blur, but the faces are better lit. On the 15 Ultra, they turned out too dark. In the next portrait selfie, Xiaomi made the skin look very tanned, almost brown. Personally, I prefer how Vivo renders skin tone, but again, it shows more errors along the blur border. And another illustrative photo from the subway with low light. Here, Vivo excellently lights up the faces and makes the skin tone more natural. With Xiaomi, however, there is noise visible on the faces, and the overall skin tone is not the most pleasant. Both smartphones made minor errors along the blur border. Now let's see how smartphones handle taking pictures of people with the main cameras without background blur. Photos at all magnifications turn out to be very similar in both quality and color reproduction. In some places, there are slight differences in skin tone, contrast, and white balance. However, starting with the 3x telephoto lens, Xiaomi begins to add contrast to the photos more actively than Vivo. It is also noticeable that at 15x digital zoom, the Ultra adds a yellow tint to the skin tone, whereas with Vivo, the skin looks natural and pleasant. Let's move on to testing portrait photos on the main camera module. Here, I would like to point out an important nuance. With Vivo, you can use the focal length designation in both millimeters and times for taking portraits. Personally, I find millimeters more convenient and understandable, and this approach will definitely be appreciated by everyone who has worked with professional cameras. On Xiaomi, as well as on other flagships, only times are available to us. An important point. With Vivo, the maximum focal length for taking portraits is 135 millimeters, which is approximately equal to 6x, whereas Xiaomi is limited to a 4.3x. Zoom. Xiaomi has 2 modes for portraits, Master Portrait and Leica Portrait. Let's start with the watering can. At all focal lengths, Xiaomi's skin tone comes out rich, with a clear shift towards an orange tint. With Vivo, the skin has a slight yellowish tint, and the overall color reproduction shifts to the brand's signature turquoise shades. Another point, the X200 Pro has noticeably higher exposure, which causes the background outside the window to be overexposed. But on the other hand, the face is better lit. I turn on the Master Portrait mode on Xiaomi, and here, the skin tone shifts to yellow hues, which looks less appealing. The same story applies when shooting in bright sunlight. My face and my mom's face in photos taken with Xiaomi become too saturated and yellow. I prefer the result with Vivo. The skin looks more natural and simply pleasing to the eye. We move on to the classic spoon fork test and see how smartphones handle thin objects in the frame in portrait mode. And unfortunately, both smartphones failed this test. In almost all close-ups, the fork turned out to be blurry. Interestingly, both recognized the noodle perfectly, with almost no issues for the smartphones. Let's move on to the landscape shooting test in good lighting. With the ultra-wide lens, you can immediately see the difference in focus when shooting from a low angle. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra emphasizes the foreground, blurring the background, while the Vivo X200 Pro keeps almost the entire frame in focus. When shooting from a straight-on angle, the results are similar, but the Vivo has more saturated greenery and skies in almost all of them. Photos. We also see again how much wider the coverage is with the Xiaomi lens. For an ultra-wide-angle camera, this is definitely a plus. On the main camera, the X200 Pro again enhances the sky and slightly overexposes the shots. By the way, friends, as you noticed, our location is simply amazing. This is the heart of Denmark, The beautiful Copenhagen. The city is filled with historical architecture. Here, for example, is the Church of Our Lady, the main cathedral of Copenhagen. And here are a few photos from the city's harbor. Once it was a very dangerous place, but now it's a true tourist paradise. But let's get back to our cameras. For the other zooms and lenses, the situation is roughly the same. Here, Vivo also sometimes enhances the sky, and I should note that it better illuminates the foreground if it's in the shade. For example, in this photo of the legendary Little Mermaid sculpture taken with Xiaomi, it turned out a bit dark in my opinion. Another example of lens style, the Rosenborg Castle Tower. The X200 Pro gave us a photo with even lighting across all parts of the image, while on the 15 Ultra, the shadow side of the tower is very dark. Now we are taking raw photos. These are photos that are saved directly from the sensor, cameras without smartphone algorithm processing. The raw format provides maximum flexibility for post-processing images, and in good lighting, we can achieve very similar results. In these shots, it's important to mention that the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has several formats for this type of shooting: Standard RAW, JPEG Plus, RAW, and Ultra RAW. Ultra RAW can be shot in 3 resolutions, 12, 50, and 200 megapixels. But there's a nuance here. 12 MP Ultra RAW is available at all focal lengths, but 50 and 200 MP are only available on the main module. The Vivo X200 Pro also has 2 types of RAW shooting, Standard RAW and Super RAW, and I recommend using S-RAW, especially in challenging conditions and low light. Standard RAW photos on the Vivo may have noise and perform worse with light sources, but S-RAW will give you a higher quality result. Moreover, Vivo Super RAW can be done with high resolution. The Vivo X200 Pro is one of the best smartphones for raw photo quality. It works great with the sky, reduces noise, and the detail is outstanding. Let's move on to the test of the photo zoom. Both smartphones are equipped with a 50 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and the photos from these lenses are very similar in quality. But Xiaomi has noticeable issues with the darkened area at the bottom of the frame. The water is not visible at all and noise appears, which the X200 Pro does not have. On the main lens at 1x, there's a difference, mainly in color reproduction. In other aspects, the photos are identical. At 2x zoom, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra performs slightly better. The fine text is read more clearly on it. We switch to 3x on the 15 Ultra and 3.7x on the Vivo. Both connect telephoto lenses, but Vivo's is up to 200 MP, while Xiaomi's is only 50. Here, Vivo definitely wins in terms of detail due to the superior lens. The next magnification is 4.3x, and on Xiaomi, the second telephoto lens at 200 MP is working here. On Vivo, we switch to 5x. This is already digital zoom. However, the X200 Pro still provides a higher quality and more detailed result, which is actually unexpected. At 10x, Xiaomi has the advantage again. Fine details are better preserved, and text is read more confidently. Vivo's image is less sharp. We move on to 20x zoom. Here, both smartphones clearly enhance the image, but Xiaomi handles Latin script a bit better. Vivo's letters are more blurred. At 30x, the photo quality of the smartphones is roughly the same, but Xiaomi smooths the image more and reduces noise. By the way, on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, starting from 30x zoom and beyond, there's an option to enable image enhancement, and then the smartphone's algorithms will actively refine your photos at higher digital zoom levels. At 60x, the 15 Ultra again provides more readable small text, while Vivo's image is more contrasty and textured. And the final zoom level is 120x for Xiaomi and 100x for Vivo X200 Pro. And here, Vivo unexpectedly takes the lead. Its photos are sharper, the text is more legible, and the overall detail is higher. And now we're testing how smartphones handle food photography. The Vivo X200 Pro has a separate food mode for this, and you can use interesting presets there. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra doesn't have such a mode, but despite this, the shots turn out quite similar, although personally, I prefer the result on the Vivo. It slightly blurs the background, making the dish look more expressive. In addition, the X200 Pro has a cool feature called Tilt Shift Lens Simulation. Photos using this feature look very interesting. The 15 Ultra doesn't have such settings and effects, but the final shots still turn out nice. And now let's move on to the macro photography on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. The macro mode is implemented very strangely. You turn on the macro tab at the top. The camera zooms in, but it's not a full telephoto lens, just a fixed zoom. And you can't control it further, neither increase nor decrease. Honestly, it's very inconvenient. It feels like you're just limited in the freedom of macro shooting. But the Vivo X200 Pro is on a completely different level. I haven't come across any smartphones that capture macro shots so conveniently and beautifully. Everything is sharp, high quality, and importantly, very convenient. You just point, take a shot, and you get a stunning picture. In comparison, Xiaomi with its macro photography doesn't even come close. By the way, as our subscribers on our awesome Telegram channel noticed, the link to which will be in the description, it seems like Xiaomi's camera is smudged, but it's more likely due to the aquarium glass, which created this effect. Interestingly, it took the shot through the glass. No problem at all. Perhaps the X200 Pro algorithms somehow process even such photos to make them look great. Let's talk about camera features. Xiaomi doesn't have that many. There are various filters and portrait enhancement, and that's about it. Vivo, of course, has a much greater variety of modes and photo features, and we have detailed them in the Vivo camera setup guides. The link will be in the description. Both smartphones offer a high-speed burst mode. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra can take up to 100 shots in a few seconds. Vivo X200 Pro, only 20 shots. But despite the advantage in the number of photos, Xiaomi shows noticeable distortion in proportions, in individual shots, as well as noise and color distortion. Vivo doesn't have such problems. Now let's take an instant photo. Here the result is almost the same, but Vivo is slightly better. Sharpness, however, sometimes the X200 Pro produces shots with color distortions.
Friends, well, a cold night has come upon us. And now, we will test the photo and video capabilities of our smartphones in low light and artificial lighting conditions.
Friends, as per tradition, we start with the front camera. 4K at 30 frames per second on both smartphones. Xiaomi 15 Ultra 4K at 30 frames per second in. Vivo X200 Pro 4K 30 frames per second. I'm standing here and there's a lot of light when it's on me.
Both images turn out to be noisy and lacking in detail. In terms of color reproduction, the Xiaomi image appears quite warm, while the Vivo image is cooler, especially when looking at the background. The skin tone varies depending on the lighting, sometimes appearing yellowish with Vivo and sometimes with Xiaomi. It's also noticeable that stabilization on the 15 Ultra works better even while moving, whereas the background wobbles with the X200 Pro. The difference is even more noticeable while running. At 60 FPS, the image on the Xiaomi becomes more stable during movement. Pay attention to the background. The shake with each step is gone, and there's no more blurring. The difference is more visible during a run. 60 FPS gives us a more stable result. At the same time, with Vivo at 60 FPS, the color reproduction and skin tone change slightly. The skin looks nicer, and the yellowness disappears. However, the situation with stabilization doesn't change much, although the blurring of light sources has decreased somewhat.
This is how the video portrait works on both smartphones in Full HD at 30 frames per second. Xiaomi 15 Ultra in Full HD. 30 frames per second on the Vivo X200 Pro. Accordingly, shooting with a background blur effect.
In portrait mode, I would also prefer Xiaomi for its more pleasant color reproduction and skin tone, as well as for its more reliable stabilization.
So, this is how the recording looks if you shoot in 4K at 30 frames per second, filming everything around. But again, I try to choose the best possible.
On Svetlaya Street, different. Flowers begin.
When shooting with the ultra-wide lens on Xiaomi, the image turns out very dark, making part of the frame barely discernible. The Vivo X200 Pro provides a more exposed image. The detail is somewhat weak on both smartphones, but the Vivo still has better image quality. When moving, the stabilization on both devices works uncertainly, but the X200 Pro's video is still a bit smoother.
And this is what filming in ultra-wide at 4K 30 frames per second looks like. But here, I'm being lit really well. Flashlights. I hope the filming turns out beautifully. There, it's cold here, of course.
When filming myself, I'll note again that Vivo illuminates the frame better, which makes the result look more advantageous. In terms of detail, it also clearly surpasses Xiaomi. The texture, jacket, and facial details are better preserved on the X200 Pro. Vivo also handled stabilization more confidently, whereas the background noticeably blurs with Xiaomi.
The main lens records in 4K at 30 frames per second.
Filming everything around. This is how our picture looks.
When shooting at 1x, Vivo once again leads in detail. Pay attention, for example, to the sign. On the X200 Pro, the text is much more discernible. Also, Vivo shows better stabilization both during regular walking and intense running, whereas Xiaomi exhibits strong shaking and blurring.
And now I have activated the mode Night on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Our picture has become 4K 24 frames per second.
On the Vivo X200 Pro, 4K at 30 frames per second. Shooting at 1x, no changes made.
In night mode on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, the stabilization seems to have only gotten worse. The image jerks and blurs with every step.
And this is what filming looks like if you record yourself in mode Night on Xiaomi 15 Ultra 4K 24 frames per second.
Meanwhile, on the Vivo X20 Pro, we have 4K at 30 frames per second, shooting with the main lens.
When filming yourself, we again see Vivo's advantage in detail. For example, if we look at the texture of the clothing, the skin tone comes out roughly similar. It appears yellowish on Xiaomi than on Vivo. By the way, both smartphones caught glare from the lights, but the glare was stronger and more noticeable on Vivo. In terms of stabilization, the 15 Ultra again shows itself to be uncertain, clearly lagging behind the competitor. At 2x zoom, Xiaomi completely fails with stabilization, giving us frames with strong blurring and shaking. Vivo looks just excellent in comparison. If we compare shooting at 30 and 60 frames per second, we immediately see an improvement improvement in stabilization on the ultra-wide lens with Xiaomi, but the image has become way too dark. On the main lens, 60 FPS also provides more confident stabilization, and the video itself has become noticeably brighter. Xiaomi also shows noticeable video improvement at 60 FPS and at 2x zoom. As for shooting with Vivo, the improvement in stabilization at 60 FPS is only noticeable on the ultra-wide lens. At other focal lengths, the advantage of the increased frame rate is not visible.
The Xiaomi Mi 15 Ultra has a movie mode with a background blur effect. And the Vivo X200 Pro is in mode Video Portrait, 4K at 30 frames per second on the main lens.
In low light, both smartphones handle portrait video differently. Vivo gives us an orange and dark image, while Xiaomi provides a more exposed and more pleasantly colored one, although the face looks somewhat pale. When we don't have enough light, both smartphones produce more or less similar results. As for video quality, Vivo's image looks better, and the face is in focus, maintaining stability as well. With Xiaomi, the face occasionally blurs, and in the stabilization test, the X200 Pro performs more confidently than its competitors. Meanwhile, with Xiaomi, the background jitters with every step.
Friends, now filming everything around. Ultra wide angle. Lens on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra 8K, 30 frames per second. X200 Pro can only shoot in Super Tour mode at 4K 30 frames per second. This is the kind of picture we get.
Xiaomi, of course, can boast 8K resolution on the ultra-wide. But what's the point? Color reproduction, clarity, and stabilization all suffer greatly in low light conditions, and the video ends up being very dark again. In my opinion, the Vivo S4K ultra-wide does a better job, including with stabilization.
Right now, we have a Xiaomi with 8K, 30 frames per second, and we filmed ourselves. And Vivo X200 Pro, 4K, 30 frames per second, recorded myself. How I am generally visible.
When filming yourself, Vivo also performs better, with a brighter image, slightly higher detail, and less noise. And with stabilization, Vivo also performs significantly better than Xiaomi's flagship. Its background remains steadier and doesn't have the same blur as the 15 Ultra.
8K recording at 30 frames per second.
On One X, Xiaomi performs slightly better with light sources and maintains stabilization a bit more confidently while moving. The level of detail is extremely similar. During a run, both smartphones deliver a weak result. The 15 Ultra shakes, while Vivo significantly blurs the image.
Well, now shooting in 8K at 30 frames per second, the main lens of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra smartphone cloud.
Vivo X200 Pro, 8K 30 frames per second, main lens.
When filming yourself, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra gives us a very warm image and enhances the face. With Vivo, the colors are noticeably cooler and the face looks more natural. And personally, I like this result more. As for the detail, everything is roughly the same again. Stabilization works about the same, with slight shakes noticeable in both, but overall it's not bad. However, at the end of the test, I can say that 8K is still not the best option filming at night, and 4K filming will be much better. Testing zoom video at night. On the Xiaomi, the result is a noisy dark image, which, in my opinion, is inferior to the result from Vivo. When shooting at 1x, both smartphones show approximately similar results. The same goes for 2x. The result on both smartphones is similar, but it's noticeable that Xiaomi handles overexposed areas of the frame better. At 3x, Xiaomi switches to a telephoto lens, while Vivo uses digital zoom. And, of course, the 15 Ultra definitely wins here. When comparing the telephoto lens at 4.3x and at 3.7x, the situation is already reversed. The detail is better on the Vivo. At 10x, the detail is also slightly better on Xiaomi, but Vivo again handles noise better. At 20x zoom, Xiaomi again provides us with sharper images, but there's a lot of noise. Also, the 15 Ultra offers a 30x zoom, which performs quite well, and we can even read such distant inscriptions. However, the noise and distortions are very noticeable in the image. If we compare shooting at 30 and 60 FPS on Xiaomi, we won't really see a difference. It's a different story with Vivo. Here at 60 FPS, the image looks sharper and the text is more readable, whereas at 30 FPS it's a bit blurred. When shooting in night mode, the image is just hard to look at without tears. The frame is blurry, with lots of glare and artifacts. And the thing is, it's only available on the main lens, and therefore, the zoom here is digital. That's exactly why we get such quality. Testing 8K zoom. For Xiaomi, this resolution is available even with the ultra-wide lens, whereas on Vivo, it's only 4K. But the X200 Pro gives us a higher quality and more readable image than the 15 Ultra. Xiaomi's video is very dark, with more noise and loss of detail. However, on the main 8K lens, Xiaomi looks more advantageous than Vivo's 8K. The image is sharper, the text more readable, whereas Vivo's video is noisy and flickering. At 2x zoom, the detail is roughly similar on both smartphones, but the 15 Ultra once again has a more precise and clean image. With Xiaomi, 8K is also available on telephoto lenses. On Vivo, all zooms after 2x are only 4K. At 3x zoom, Xiaomi is already leading, and when comparing 4.3x and 3.7x, the difference is almost unnoticeable again. Taking selfies in low light. Both devices activate screen lighting for night selfies, which is, of course, pleasing. There's no significant difference in the selfies. similar skin tone, similar detail, but in some photos from Xiaomi, it seems like there's a turquoise filter or film applied. This applies to both regular and portrait photos. Both smartphones also handle portraits. Similarly, but if you look closely at the details, you'll notice that Xiaomi handles the blur more neatly. For example, Vivo didn't manage the area near my shoulder here, leaving an unblurred section. We are taking photos of people with the main camera block. Overall, both smartphones perform quite well. The pictures turn out pleasant and of high quality. At different zoom levels, the shades and skin tones change slightly, but my overall impression of all the photos is positive. At maximum zoom levels, it's noticeable that Vivo enhances the sharpness of the images more, giving us a sense of higher quality. But in reality, the quality of the photos is roughly the same. In the second photo shoot with my wife, Xiaomi started to fall behind in quality. At certain zoom levels, it overexposed my wife's face and handled the lights in the frame worse. And at 10x zoom, something strange happened with the background in the photo. Later, the results evened out again, but Vivo once more pulled ahead in sharpness. Night portraits, a strong point of the Vivo X200 Pro, is its impressive and strong blur effect, which creates cool light bokeh in the background. I also note that Vivo's photos are more saturated and contrasty. Because of this, they look better, in my opinion. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra offers a more natural and less pronounced processing. However, this doesn't mean its results are worse. No, it also gives us beautiful portraits. As for the blur itself, it performs quite neatly on all photos on both smartphones. In the second photo shoot with me, we also have the color master mode. Here are photos on the main lens. Personally, I prefer the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Its photos are more contrasty and slightly darker, which makes the same neon letters in the background look better. Vivo raises the exposure higher to illuminate the foreground and face, but as a result, the background also becomes lighter. As for the other close-ups, we get exactly the same results as in the first photo shoot. And in general, I like both shooting options, but my personal preference, I will still give it to Vivo for more contrast, vibrant photos, and for a greater number of available focal lengths. We take photos of everything around with the main camera. When taking photos with the ultra-wide on the Vivo X200 Pro, the color reproduction is more natural. It shows a more natural sky without any yellow tint. The Xiaomi here has a strange haze and less natural color reproduction with a yellowish tint. On the main lens, both smartphones give us good results. Here we see that all the shots are sharp with natural color reproduction and good detail. At 2x zoom, the results are also very similar. The photo detail is good on both smartphones. We are testing raw photos in low light conditions. In the first photo, it's noticeable that the Xiaomi photo wasn't processed as well as with the Vivo. It has more glare on the signs, and noise is noticeable in the sky. In the other photos, the 15 Ultra also didn't handle the overexposure well. In some places, the light sources are completely blown out, and it's not possible to fix this in post-processing. Testing the photo zoom, lighting drawbacks. When shooting with the ultra-wide on the Vivo X200 Pro, it performs much better. Xiaomi, when taking photos at 50 megapixels, gave us a very blurry result with strong glare on the light sources. To get a more acceptable result, I recommend taking night photos on Xiaomi at 12 megapixel resolution. As you can see, the result turned out better. On the main lens, the 15 Ultra still has the same problems, while everything looks great on the Vivo. At 2x zoom, both smartphones deliver a similar result. Let's move on to comparing the telephoto lenses, 3x on Xiaomi and 3.7x on Vivo. And the telephoto lens on the X200 Pro leaves Xiaomi no chance. Its text is more clearly distinguishable and there are no glares. Next, we compare 4.3x on Xiaomi and 5.0x on Vivo. Again, I don't recommend taking 200 megapixel photos on Xiaomi in such conditions. Compare it yourself with the result when shooting at 12 megapixels. But even this photo from the 15 Ultra still falls short of the shot from the Vivo. At 10x zoom, the X200 Pro once again delights with higher quality photo. At 30x, both smartphones blur the details, trying to fill them in with algorithms. At 60x, the image is also blurred in details, and I can only note that the Vivo is less noisy. On Xiaomi, the maximum zoom is 120x, while on Vivo it's 100x. Here, it's slightly better. The X200 Pro performed. It retained the distant silhouettes of the small 2SDK inscription, whereas on the Xiaomi, it is completely blurred. The Vivo X200 Pro has a huge advantage thanks to its specialized modes, allowing for a clearer picture of the starry sky, with less digital noise. Xiaomi, using standard modes, may produce more noise or halos around stars. Vivo also has a very cool AR planetarium mode that will captivate not only your children but also you. When taking long exposure photos, the Vivo X200 Pro and Xiaomi 15 Ultra give us almost identical results, except that Xiaomi has slightly higher exposure. The main difference lies in the implementation of this mode. Vivo automatically stops the shooting, whereas with Xiaomi, you need to manually stop it. Otherwise, the 15 Ultra has everything implemented conveniently and clearly here, recording circles and telegram. It's noticeable that the image quality when shooting a circle on Xiaomi has significantly dropped compared to regular ones. Video on the front camera. Also, the stabilization holds much worse, and the color color of the image becomes slightly more saturated. In the Vivo X200 Pro, we also observe a decrease in quality, image issues, and stabilization problems. Posting photos on Instagram. But I can say that there are no significant differences between the originals and the published photos on either Xiaomi or Vivo. The Chinese version of the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is equipped with a 6000 mAh battery. The global version, which we are reviewing, has a battery capacity of 5410 mAh. Both smartphones are equipped with next-generation batteries featuring silicon and carbon anodes. They have the ability to store a larger capacity while maintaining the same size. They work without issues at sub-zero temperatures, charge faster, and last longer. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra supports fast wired charging at 90 watts, wireless charging at 80 watts and 10-watt reverse charging. The Vivo X200 Pro has a battery capacity of 6000 mAh. It supports fast wired charging at 90 watts, as well as wireless and reverse charging at 30 watts. At the end of the first day of filming, Xiaomi retained 37% charge compared to 60% for Vivo. On the second day, the 15 Ultra was completely discharged, while the Vivo only discharged to 28%. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra is equipped with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, and the graphics processing is handled by the Adreno 830. The Vivo X200 Pro, on the other hand, features the latest MediaTek Dimensity 9400 processor manufactured using a 3nm process. The graphics subsystem is represented by the Mali G925 and Mortalis MP12. The Untitled test was completed faster by the Vivo X200 Pro, scoring significantly more points. And interestingly, it didn't heat up as much as the 15 Ultra, including the performance mode, which is available on both smartphones. And here again, the Vivo X200 Pro surpasses the Xiaomi flagship. In Geekbench, the situation is different. In the single-core and multi-core tests, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra processor showed better results, while in the GPU test, Vivo had a higher score. The result was shown by Vivo, and again, it heated up less. We present the smartphone stability test under prolonged load in 3D Mark, and in the end, we see that the 15 Ultra stability turned out to be higher than that of the X200 Pro. The gap was 8%. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra is equipped with an AMOLED screen with a 6.73-inch diagonal WQHD Plus resolution and a dynamic refresh rate of up to 120 Hz. The display is protected by Xiaomi Shield Glass 2.0. The Vivo X200 Pro uses an AMOLED panel with a 6.78-inch diagonal. The refresh rate is also adaptive. The screen is protected by armor glass. Let's measure the PWM frequency. At maximum brightness, the Vivo X200 Pro shows excellent results, only 5% compared to 15% for Xiaomi. At 50% brightness, Vivo impresses again, 6% compared to 18% for Xiaomi. At 25% brightness, the PWM frequency is similar for both smartphones, about 14%. At minimum brightness, the result is also similar. For Xiaomi, we see about 12%. For Vivo, it's 13%. Regarding screen settings, Xiaomi allows us to set a higher resolution, and we can also enable super resolution for video viewing and turn on HDR enhancements. In addition, we can enable MEMC technology, which makes the picture smoother by adding frames. The 15 Ultra also has a reading mode. It automatically adjusts the screen to minimize eye strain as much as possible. We check the PWM frequency on Xiaomi when using all these features. At maximum brightness, it's almost 15%. At half brightness, the result is almost the same as last time. At a quarter brightness, the PWM frequency also hasn't changed, but at minimum brightness, the result is slightly different, around 11% PWM. Measuring Wi-Fi speed, smartphones connecting to the gigabit network one by one so they don't interfere with each other. And here Vivo shows slightly higher numbers for download and upload. In the second test, when connected to another provider, the leadership in download speed goes to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, but the X200 Pro, in turn, shows higher numbers for upload. Testing 5G mobile internet speed. Vivo's download speed leaves no chance for Xiaomi, but the 15 Ultra performs better on upload. I have the latest software version installed on my Xiaomi at the time of filming. Let's see what AI features it offers us. Xiaomi Hyper AI. Well, first of all, since this is an Android smartphone, Gemini works here with all the Google features. As for the built-in assistant from Xiaomi, it has extensive functionality. There is an AI writer here that can effectively correct, expand, and refine an already written text or write a completely new one. There is the ability to create live wallpapers based on regular photos. There are many features related to photos, and they are all quite interesting. Among them is the ability to enhance clarity using algorithms. A photograph. AI Photo Expansion Eraser allows you to remove unnecessary objects. The function of removing objects from photos is, of course, no longer surprising anyone. Both smartphones handle this quickly, but not very well yet. For example, when removing a person from a photo, Xiaomi clearly recognizes the boundaries, but the final result is questionable. It's worth noting the unusual AI film feature separately. It allows you to create a unique video sequence based on your photos or videos while adding music. There is also the familiar function of converting speech to text. Moreover, if multiple speakers are detected, the smartphone will distinguish each speaker and indicate them in the text. AI can also translate the transcribed text into different languages. AI subtitles also allow for real-time speech translation. The text will be available both in the original language and translated. AI search allows you to quickly find any photos, videos, files, and notes within the smartphone. Xiaomi also offers extensive options for wallpaper personalization. If desired, you can set up a variety of interesting effects and filters. And as I mentioned before, the Xiaomi 15 Ultra has several features related to the screen. I won't repeat myself here.
And now we will test how well the speakers on our smartphones work, which one plays louder. I like the sound on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra more. Firstly, the sound on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is slightly louder, and also, it seems to me that it handles the speakers better, whereas on the Vivo X200 Pro. But there are too many noises. It feels like the speakers are overloaded, barely coping.
I have the new flagship from Xiaomi in the global version with 512 gigabytes. I purchased it right at the start of sales for 1,300 euros, including a discount. Additionally, I received a branded photo kit and a tablet as a gift. That's nice. By the way, Xiaomi has upgraded the photo kit. It now features a removable shutter button and a thumb rest. It has become more convenient to hold and use this thing. They also upgraded the handle's battery from 1500 to 2000 mAh. By the way, I had to buy the charger separately for an additional 10 euros. And while I was at it, I picked up a few more gadgets from Xiaomi, ending up spending a little over 1,600 euros in total. I also bought the global version of the Vivo X200 Pro with 512 gigabytes at the launch for 1,099 euros. Now in Spain, it cost from 1199 euros, but it's still cheaper than the new Xiaomi 15 Ultra. Friends, let's figure out whether it's worth getting the Xiaomi 15 Ultra now if you need a good camera phone. Let's start with the pros. The Xiaomi 15 Ultra pleasantly surprises with its front camera. It performs well in normal lighting and even in backlighting. Moreover, the front camera of Xiaomi has excellent stabilization. Even in motion, the image remains smooth without jerks, including in low light and portrait mode. On the ultra-wide and main lens in good lighting, Xiaomi consistently delivers high-quality images, and importantly, the ultra-wide lens here has a noticeably wider field of view than the Viva, and the video quality does not suffer. Also, on the Xiaomi, we have video zoom available up to 30x, but during the day, such zoom didn't provide us with any particular advantage. Well, for example, in night tests, the 30x zoom worked quite well. A plus is that 8K video can be shot with any lens here, even with the ultra-wide, and in good lighting, the detail is indeed higher than 4K. I was also personally surprised by the availability of slow motion up to 1920 frames per second at full HD quality. I haven't seen such capabilities on any smartphone. However, we'll discuss the quality of slow motion in the cons of the smartphone. I was also pleased with the presence of the dual recording mode. You can simultaneously record yourself and the surroundings in 4K, and the result turns out to be quite decent. It's also pleasing to have a fairly good HDR and Dolby Vision, as well as log video on all lenses. I would also count the well-implemented time-lapse as a positive aspect. The screen turns off during recording, saving energy and not interfering with the process. Of course, this doesn't significantly help with battery saving, but that's another discussion. The high-speed shooting was also impressive. The smartphone can take 100 frames in a few seconds. What can I say about photography? Overall, Xiaomi left a positive impression on me with both daytime landscape and portrait photography, as well as nighttime shots. The photos mostly turn out pleasant and beautiful, and I must note, the maximum photo zoom of 120x is impressive. Of course, the very possibility of such magnification is intriguing, like having a full-fledged binocular inside a smartphone. I also note that long exposure shooting is implemented conveniently, and the result is quite impressive. Another plus is the ability to take photos in RAW at all focal lengths. With that, I finish praising Xiaomi and start criticizing it, and unfortunately, there are reasons for that. The main problem with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra is video recording in low light while in motion. The ultra-wide lens performs terribly, the image is dark, stabilization is weak, and the other focal lengths aren't particularly impressive either. 60 frames and night mode don't improve the situation at all. In 8K, the image is essentially unusable as well, with the picture being dark, noisy, and blurry. Even in 4K, Vivo shows better results. The second huge downside for me personally is the weak portrait mode when recording video. Xiaomi is limited to full HD at 24 frames per second, which is not serious at all for a flagship in 2025. I would also consider the resolution and stabilization of the slow motion mode as drawbacks. We only have full HD available, even if we're shooting at 120 FPS. And if you try to shoot slow motion video while moving, it turns into a real nightmare. Defocus, shaking, video blurring. In short, it's disappointing. As for the photo drawbacks, I would mention the skin tone, which sometimes shifts to a pink or yellow-orange tint, especially on the front camera and in portraits. Another drawback of Xiaomi is the weak battery battery, which I thoroughly tested while shooting a time-lapse. On one hand, the smartphone turns off the screen to save battery, but on the other hand, after a few hours of shooting, it drains completely, even with this feature. Meanwhile, Vivo comfortably retains 53% charge, even with the screen on. So, in the end, friends, would I buy the Xiaomi 15 Ultra for myself now instead of the Vivo X200 Pro? And my answer is definitely no. To Vivo. In many shooting scenarios, it's clearer, more convenient, and closer to me. But that doesn't mean the 15 Ultra is a failure. I would confidently recommend it to those upgrading from older Xiaomi models, especially if you've used the 13 or 14 Ultra. Here, the company has clearly taken a step forward compared to previous generations for brand fans and those who haven't upgraded in a while. It's a good option if choosing between it and the X200 Pro right now. Personally, I would stick with Vivo. If you agree or disagree, be sure to write in the comments. We always appreciate your opinion. And, of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and the bell so you don't miss our next awesome reviews. And goodbye to everyone.